The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Oriental Magic by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Chapter 5. Egyptian Magic. Get thee back, for thou art cut asunder. Thy soul is shrivelled up. Thy cursed name is buried in oblivion, and silence is upon it, and it hath fallen. From the Ptolemaic Book of Overthrowing Apep. That there was a connection between Jewish and Egyptian magical practices is abundantly proved by the many references to this fact in works of literature and religion. In addition to this testimony, we also know that the Semites, like the Greeks, Romans, and others of the ancient world, were firmly convinced of the superiority of Egyptian magic over the thaumaturgy of other lands. Moses, as we learn from the Bible and the Quran, was one of Egypt's greatest foreign disciples in the practice of the art. Like the Egyptians, he used a magical staff or wand. Like them, he caused the waters to be divided. He even used some of the mystic words of power of the pharaonic priesthood. When Moses fought his famous magical duel with the sorcerers of the Nile, magic was already a flourishing and integral part of Egyptian religion. Royalty, the priesthood, and the people were bound inextricably by magic. Was it not the magician son of Ramses II himself who pitted his arts against Moses in 1300 BC? 200 years earlier, the Westcar Papyrus tells us, a miracle identical with the reputed parting of the waters by Moses was performed by the chief priest of the day. So flourishing was the practice of magic in the Egypt of about 3000 BC that the very name of the land has passed into our language as a synonym for it. Just as the ancient Semitic word inga produced the English term magic, so one of the oldest names for Egypt, Khemd, dark or black, came to be translated black in place of Egyptian magic. Egypt, of course, was called the Black not because of the diabolism of its magic, but from the colour of its earth when flooded by Nile water. In the Egyptian, as in the Akkadian and Chaldean magica religious systems, the idea of sin and punishment in a future life was not well developed. Magic was divided socially rather than spiritually. Legitimate magic was a part of religion, illicit magic was a crime, and punishable by death through obligatory suicide. A second term, alchemy, Arabic alchimia, also stems from this same name. In other words, both the phrases alchemy and black art are to be traced to an original meaning of art of Egypt. With the possible exception of the controversy about Atlantis, there surely has been no country about whose ancient history and occult activities so much has been written from so many points of view. Garbled versions of rituals performed in the Valley of the Kings were taken back to the desert by Arabian Bedouins and embroidered upon until, all over the Near East, Egypt was implicitly believed to be peopled by a race of sorcerers. Throughout the Dark Ages, this idea, stimulated by biblical quotations and Semitic magicians, gained a firm grasp on men's minds. Even during the period of the scientific investigation of the pyramids and other pharaonic monuments, Western occultists have vied with one another to deduce mysteries from everything Egyptian. Naturally, this produced a reaction. A group of observers, many of them with perhaps less real knowledge than the empiricist school, denounced Egyptian magic as something which had no true reality. The only magic that the Egyptians had, they held, was their religion. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. We know that ancient Egyptian magic and religion were strongly bound up together. We know, too, for that matter, that most forms of magic have an affinity with religious systems. Papyri and tomb inscriptions give us many indications that rites which are familiar to students of the occult were known, and even possibly originated in ancient Egypt. And this leaves unsaid the testimony of the vast volume of secondary sources, the Greek, Arabic, and Hebrew records, which contain processes which very possibly include some of those practiced by the priesthood of Isis. Were the Egyptian priests miracle workers? Did they in fact have knowledge which is still hidden to us? Those who want to believe these things will say yes. Those who take the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scriptures as true will unhesitatingly say there is no doubt. Others will just have to examine the evidence and try to satisfy themselves. Generally speaking, the religio-magical rites of these people were concerned with the maintenance of prosperity and the security of the spirit in a future life. It is against the historical background of Egyptian life, therefore, that their rites are to be examined. Works involving power and success, like those of the destruction of an enemy, form a slightly different class. These latter were, it seems, originally part of the secrets held by the initiated priesthood as a sort of political magic. Naturally, it was one of the aims of royalty to ensure that the most powerful magic was of its own group. Later, however, as the finding of tens of thousands of scarabs and other amulets testifies, magic took on a popular aspect. This remains the position, though there are a few official royal magicians in practice. It is necessary to have some idea of Egypt in order to attempt to put oneself in the place of its people. The climate and geography, which govern so many aspects of ancient Egyptian life, have altered little in the past 5,000 years. Dominating all else is, of course, the Nile. That fact alone is one of the central thoughts in the religion of Egypt, as in its magic, art, and literature. For all practical purposes, the country consists of a long strip of cultivable land. For nearly 1,200 miles, this strip is bracketed by mountain chains. Beyond these, there is little else than desert. In the center flows the powerful current of the Nile itself, depositing the black earth on either bank, the earth which was to give magic one of its most familiar names. Almost every vegetable product grown in this area figures in magical rites carried out in the Middle East even today. Date palms, acacia trees, the sycamores, wheat, barley, and millet, these are thought to be among the most powerful items in a magician's storehouse. The Nile rises every year between the 1st and the 16th of July, bringing new life to the land dried up by many months of fierce heat. Its rising in flood by September is the signal for a festival in Cairo, the Feast of the Nile. Peasants, says Gaston Maspero, laden with provisions, come from afar and eat together. The priests leave their temples and carry the statue of the Nile god along the banks of the Nile to the sound of chants and music. The priesthood of Isis, foremost magicians of Egypt, were specially important at these events. Part of the chant to the Nile is given in a papyrus roll in the British Museum. Hail to you, Nile, who rises to the earth to give life to Egypt. Men dance for joy when thou risest from the unknown. Side by side one sees the men of the Thebaid and those of the north. When the horn signals that the Nile is risen, we sing to thee with the harp and beating hands. Interpreted in magical terms, the rising of the river symbolized the marriage of Osiris with Isis, Osiris the Nile, Isis the earth, the black earth of the area. Modern Egyptologists claim that the ritual magic practices of Egypt must date back to pre-dynastic or even prehistoric times. Elliot Smith, studying this question as an anatomist, concurs with other authorities that there was a continual ethnic drift from Inner Africa to ancient Egypt. Further evidence of the wider spreading of purely African ideas is found in this extract from the works of another Egyptologist. Towards the end of the Paleolithic age, it is possible that similar ethnical waves invaded all northern Africa. Favoured by climatic conditions other than the present, they laid the basis of a Proto-Ethiopian substratum reaching from the Red Sea to the Atlantic in all those countries where they have left their rough stone implements along the great watercourses now dried up. Legend states that Shem, son of Noah, came to Egypt at the age of 300 years, 190 years after the flood, and ruled the country for another 161 years. During this time, magic flourished there. Jewish tradition has it, of course, that Noah himself was a magician, and that certain secret books were specially revealed to him. Innumerable stories are told in Egyptian and Greek writings about Egyptian processes for reviving the dead. While it is known that the Egyptians believed that the body would resurrect in another world, yet there are also clear indications that some of the rites were designed to revive the corpse. It is, of course, claimed that this was done not once, but many times. What makes this account interesting is the fact that one of the pharaohs most famed for his magical learning actually caused the experiment to be undertaken in his presence. He was Herutataf, son of Cheops or Khufu, and lived nearly 4,000 years before Christ. The Pyramid of Cheops was built circa 3733 BC. Khufu, it seems, was one day discussing miracles with his son. Herutataf said that stories were all very well, but there were few people who had seen such things done. He then promised to show his father a man who could in fact perform the miracle of revivification of those who were not only dead, but had actually been beheaded. This magician was Teta, reputed to be 110 years old. He was versed in secrets from the famed sanctuary of Thoth. Even today it is not clear what they were. An expedition was accordingly prepared. The pharaoh's son travelled down the Nile by barge, then on by litter, until the party arrived at the abode of Teta. The account is filled with minute circumstantial detail, which seems to show that it probably took place, and that the legend is not merely one of imagination. We are told, for instance, that the sage was lying on a woven bed, probably similar to the angaribs which are still in use. Servants were rubbing his head and feet. Then follows an account of the meeting between the crown prince and the magician, in which the king's invitation was given, and Teta agreed to visit the capital. Leaning on the prince's arm, the sage accompanied the youth to where the boat was moored. Here he asked that his children and books be also brought, and this was done. When they arrived at the palace, the king ordered Teta to enter at once. As soon as he had been presented, Khufu asked why they had not met before. To this the sage replied that he came when called, and not before. "You have called, and so I have come." Then Khufu addressed the magician again. "Is it true, according to what is reported, that thou knowest how to fasten on again to its body the head which has been cut off?" The ancient replied that he could do this thing. The king asked that some condemned criminal be brought, but on the magician's intervention a goose was substituted. He cut off the head of the bird and laid it on one side of the colonnade with the body on the other side. Teta stood up and intoned some words of power. The head and body then began to move towards each other until they met, rejoined, and the head cackled. Following this feat, Teta did the same with another bird of a different species, and again he severed the head of an ox and caused it to be joined to the body. This story, taken at its face value, might be thought to show that, powerful as he was, the pharaoh Cheops had no magician in his retinue capable of duplicating this feat. History shows, however, that even while the pyramids of Giza were being built, the magical and political power of Memphis, then the seat of government, was waning. Ideas cultivated in Thebes farther up the Nile took their place, and the Theban deity Amen-Ra, Jupiter, became one of Egypt's principal gods. The power of Thebes lasted in all for 3,000 years. The effects of Egyptian magic on Greece were profound. For example, Papyrus number 75 of Reuven's is a long roll having a demotic text of 22 columns, each with over 30 lines. On the reverse is a Greek translation. Among the drawings are a sceptred deity with an ass's head and one of Anubis standing by a mummy stretched upon a bier. Lehmann's gives a translation of the Greek text, which is crammed with magical lore derived from Egyptian sources. Their headings may be briefly noted: magical ceremonies of great thaumaturgic power by means of love, the receipt for a remedy by one named Himerius, a formula for happiness and future fortune, a method of producing a dream, then two more for the same purpose. Next comes a rite by which the operator can consult a divinity. Those who are given to bouts of unbridled temper may find their salvation in yet another process. They continue almost interminably, from the making of a ring which will bring success to every enterprise, to the sphere of Democritus. Then there is a method of causing strife between man and wife. Finally, a means whereby a person is robbed of sleep until he dies is illustrated by the drawing of an Egyptian god. It is thought that the author may have been one of the priesthood of Isis, whom Porphyry criticizes. "How absurd a thing it is," he says, "that one subject to all the infirmities of humanity should affect by threats to terrify not only demons or the spirits of the dead, but the sun god himself, the moon, and other celestial beings. The magician lies in order to compel the heavenly bodies to tell the truth, for when he threatens to shake the heavens, or to reveal the mysteries of Isis, or the secret thing that lies hidden in Abydos, or to stop the sacred boat, or to scatter the limbs of Osiris to Typhon, what a height of madness does it not imply in the man who thus threatens what he neither understands nor is able to perform?" And yet Chiramon, of the 1st century AD, the sacerdotal scribe, mentions these things as having been high in the favour of the Egyptian priests in their incantations. We have it on good authority from Iamblichus that the priests of Isis did in fact practice magic. He goes on to remark that the invocations of the priesthood to their gods did contain threats. There is a strangely familiar ring about all this to one who has studied the magical rituals of the West, especially those in the Jewish tradition. The following process, too, said to be ancient Egyptian in origin, will be familiar in tone to some readers. "To be wrought by help of a boy, with a lamp, a bowl, and a pit, I invoke thee, O Zeus, Helios, Mithra, Serapis, unconquerable possessor of honey, father of honey, let the god whom I invoke come to me, and let him not depart until I dismiss him." Then the ritual proceeds: "Fill a brazen cup with oil, and anoint your right eye with water taken from a boat that has been wrecked." In spite of the many magical rituals recorded in such works as the Book of the Dead and other papyri, it seems probable that many which were used in ancient Egypt survive only as part of composite rites which have been handed down by Arab, Hebrew, and other writers. One reason is that some of the miracles allegedly performed by Egyptian wizards are not catalogued among their own books of spells. It is likewise possible that many of the processes perished due to the law of transmission, prohibiting their being confided to any but suitable adepts, and a limited number at that. It was in the use of amulets that much of the religio-magical practice of the Egyptians excelled. Familiar to most people is the scarab, a model, often in clay or stone, of one of the types of beetle indigenous to Egypt. In addition to being a symbol of the sun god, hence of life, the scarab, when placed in a tomb, was believed to possess the power of bringing the dead to life again. All that was needed in addition to the scarab for recalling the life was a knowledge of the words of power to say over the body. This scarab cult passed to Greece, whence we are given directions for charging the scarab with power before it is worn. Place the sculpted beetle, place it upon a paper table. Under the table there shall be a pure linen cloth. Under this place some olive wood, and set on the middle of the table a small censer wherein myrrh and kyphi shall be offered. And have at hand a small vessel of chrysolite into which ointment of lilies or myrrh or cinnamon shall be put. And take the ring and place it in the ointment, having first made it clean and pure, and offer it up in the censer with kyphi and myrrh. Leave the ring for 3 days, then take it out and put it in a safe place. At the celebration let there lie near at hand some pure loaves, and such fruits as are in season. Having made another sacrifice on vine sticks, during the sacrifice take the ring out of the ointment, and anoint thyself with the unction from it. Thou shalt anoint thyself early in the morning, and turning towards the east shall pronounce the words written below. The beetle shall be carved out of a precious emerald, bore it and pass a gold wire through it, and beneath the beetle carve the holy Isis, and having thus consecrated it, use it. The spell in question was, I am Thoth, the inventor and founder of medicine and letters. Come to me, thou that art under the earth, rise up to me, great spirit. It was further stated that only on certain days could the process take place, the 7th, 9th, 10th, 12th, 14th, 16th, 21st, 24th, and 25th days, counting from the start of the month. Two characteristics of ancient Egyptian magic which have descended to us in Western rituals sound the keynote of their spirit. Even in the days of Ramses II, over 5,000 years ago, the belief in the mystic word of power was highly developed, just as magic itself was considered an art so ancient as to have no known source other than revelation by the gods. There is a strong possibility that some of these words, which were sometimes even then composed of unintelligible syllables, entered Egypt as a result of Mesopotamian conquests by various pharaohs. Others, in all probability, were derived from Nubian magic, which still flourishes in Africa. The second characteristic is associated with the above belief. In order to compel the spirits and gods to obey his will, whether for good or ill, the sorcerer had to be armed with words of power and a knowledge of the names of the gods. In this way he was able to take a dictatorial attitude towards deities, however powerful. There was no exception to the number and potency of the gods that could be bound or forced to act on the sorcerer's commands. In some cases, in fact, the magician actually identified himself so closely with the powers of the god invoked that he assumed his name and issued commands on his behalf. Students of medieval European magic will recognize this trait in some of the processes in the Western versions of the Key of Solomon, in which the operator communicates with the spirit not under his own name, but as Solomon himself. The words of power, it may be assumed, are akin to the Semitic theory of the most great name of God, which even initiates must not speak. It is thought that the Egyptians shared with other peoples the belief that a name, whether of a person or a god, was vitally connected with the powers, attributes, and spiritual element of the named one. Is it entirely from modesty that women in many lands will not give their names to strangers? They are the daughter of so-and-so, or the wife of such-and-such a man. Anthropologists are familiar with tribal customs of wide currency, in which extraordinary precautions are taken to ensure that the real name of a person is not known outside his immediate family. In some cases, names are frequently changed. There is already a vast literature on this subject, and I cannot venture to add to it. The magical word or name may not be understood by him who uses it, but it still possesses its original power. This belief may not have originated with the Egyptians. It certainly was current among them, as among later magicians in many lands. In the Louvre, there is a magical funerary papyrus dating as far back as Ramses II, in which barbarous words appear as names. O Ualpaga, O Kamara, O Kamalo, O Armagoa, the Uana, the Remu. Since similar words and phrases appear in most other ancient magical writings, it is probable that they meant no more to the priests than they do to us. Following up this line of research, and assuming that some words of power came from neighbouring lands, the Viscount de Rouget in the last century compiled a list of words, unfortunately unpublished, which seem to show affinities with dialects spoken by the Nubians and others. In the Harris magical papyrus, there is a process by which the invocant, using certain names, actually takes on the shape of the god Amzu. There may be a clue here. It could be argued that the identification of the magician with a spirit or god in words and prayers might have been designed to cause him to become that god or spirit. At the least, he may be believed that he could borrow all the attributes and powers of the deity named, even for a short period. The ritual is designed to protect a man in a ship from any monster or hostile animal that might approach. Taking a hard egg in one hand, the man says, O egg of the water which has been spread over the earth, essence of the divine apes, the great one in the heavens above and in the earth beneath, who doth dwell in the nests which are in the waters, I have come forth from thee from the water, I have been with thee in thy nest, I am Amzu of Koptos, I am Amzu, Lord of Kibu. Just as names contained magical powers in relation to the life on earth, so their potency was invoked in funeral ceremonies, and they were used in the imaginary encounters between the soul and the gods of the hereafter. No soul could hope to receive its just deserts and admission to the heavens until it had passed a very close examination, as is fully described in the Book of the Dead. What of embalming and the elaborately designed pyramids, both of which have been regarded as significant items in the magic of ancient Egypt? There is already a considerable literature in which such authorities as Flinders Petrie and Wallace Budge have fully described the embalming rites and their purpose. Briefly, the reason for preserving mortal remains is thought to be because contact, however incipient, remained to link the soul, ego, ka, and body after death. Lenormant states that there was an ultimate belief that the body would one day be resurrected in its former, though purified, form. It is, however, more widely held that the mummy was preserved as a hostel for the ka. Again, the symbolic rites which were performed with the mummy, such as the opening of the mouth ceremony, seemed to be designed to reflect the events that were supposed to be happening to the soul in another world. It was, in fact, a sort of magical duplication of the soul's future life, on the familiar lines of sympathetic magic. There is a possibility, too, that a belief existed that certain organs in the body continued to function in a different way from their normal role in life. Books and pamphlets have been written in an attempt to prove that the pyramids represent symbolically both the Book of the Dead and the supposed Book of Thoth. There seems no doubt that the dimensions of some pyramids and their internal arrangement and planning are associated with mystical and magical concepts of dynastic religion. As to whether they are the key or not is a matter which is still open to discussion. Conventionally minded observers are, on the whole, inclined to regard the symbolism of the pyramids as natural projections from Egyptian belief and theology, rather than as signs placed there for any particular purpose other than to preserve the body from defilement. To take up any other attitude in the present state of knowledge of ancient Egyptian occult sciences would be tantamount to assuming that there was an intention by the Egyptian priest-magicians, or their kings, to transmit hidden knowledge to future generations. Since, however, there is no indication of a desire to make known their knowledge to others, let alone an inkling that the pharaonic might would ever pass away, one might ask upon what premises such an assumption could be held. In taking the stand outlined above, I exclude such supernatural revelations as were reported to me by one earnest occult student. He had had revealed to him in a dream, and partly through a spiritualist medium, that his mission was to go to Egypt and camp in the shadow of the pyramids when their occult power and intention would be made known to him. Being very wealthy at the time, and as keen as the next man for adventure, he did exactly as commanded. The only result was that the expenses involved were so great that he became impoverished. Equally unfortunately, no revelation resulted. When he returned to England, he found that his business had all but collapsed. It cannot, however, be denied that the experience had a very great effect upon him. Singing Sands. In the El Maman chain, near the Red Sea, is the Jebel Narkus, Mountain of the Bell. Its rocks and pinnacles are so placed that, when the wind blows from a certain direction, loud whispers are heard proceeding from the rocks. This probably accounts for the ancient Egyptians being thought by less civilized Arabian tribes to have the power of raising the voices of oracles from the ground. Many magicians claimed to be able to interpret the whispers. They were the voices of spirits, telling mankind what and what not to do. In any case, the effect on the visitor, even in this century, is eerie. Similar tales are told of the Egyptian priests taking oracles from the singing sands. These sands still sing, and probably there was at one time a regular system of interpreting the sounds. In this idea, we may have a clue as to the source of some dynastic Egyptian magical beliefs having come originally from across the Red Sea, just as we know that certain rites were derived from Inner Africa. Desert people have many superstitions in connection with singing sands, which may be as old as the Egyptian ones. If, for instance, you hear them before the new moon, the signs are good for the tribe. If after, evil. Others are that such and such a journey is to be taken, and this being the case, further enquiries must be made of the sands as to the times and places to be visited. I was told in Egypt just after the war, by a large variety of people, that a Libyan dervish had foretold war in 1937, and that he had warned the Senussi to prepare for the Western Desert campaigns. They would lead, he had said, to certain liberation from the Italian yoke. All this, and much else, he had heard from the singing sands. Near the Kom el Hatam, the mound of sandstone which marks the site of the once famous palaces and temples of Amunoth III, are two sitting colossi. One is heard apparently to chant at sunrise. Others say that this is more like the sound of a breaking harp string. Many explanations are, of course, given for this strange sound, that the colossus was raised by Memnon, who had wonderful powers. He cured the sick miraculously, raised the dead, and daily at sunrise the winds made sure that certain words were repeated by his colossus, giving the salamat, or greetings. I was even told that when Memnon and certain of his high priests return to Egypt, they will first come to converse with this voice. As opposed to this decorative and romantic story, the late Sir Gardner Wilkinson explained that he had discovered a stone on the lap of the colossus in question. Anxious to make some sort of test for himself, he ascended the figure and struck the stone with a small hammer. This sounded like brass being hit. Sir Gardner therefore states that only the striking of the stone causes the statue to appear to speak. Similar metallic noises may be attained by striking parts of the high rocks at Tunbridge Wells, especially the Bell Rock. These phenomena, known in many lands, are most probably caused by purely natural factors, or else are contrivances arranged by former peoples as a supplement to magical rites. It is not usually thought likely that there is any direct extraphysical explanation. At the same time, their value as portents has often been shown. The story is told that where Napoleon cut the road between Savoy and France, about 2 miles from Les Seychelles, there is a gallery in a tunnel 27 feet square and 975 feet in length. When the excavations for this were nearly complete and the tunnellers met in the middle, the intervening few inches were broken with a pickaxe. A sound like a great groan was heard. When this was reported to Napoleon, his face went white, because he had been told by a magician that if such a sound were heard by or near him, the future would hold only defeat. There is, of course, a scientific explanation for this happening, but the occultist would claim that the origin of a phenomenon need not be supernatural to make it valid as a sign. However, when a certain Mr. Bakewell investigated the Napoleon tunnel story, he put the whole thing down to a difference in temperature at either end of the tunnel. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.